yes, I have smoked crack cocaine.
Obviously, I was extremely, extremely inebriated.
I sincerely apologize. God bless the people of Toronto.
One Canadian mayor making headlines right around the world. Politicians have had their say. Now it's our turn to weigh in. Time for Sunday Scrum.
He's in denial over his personal issues.
That's a widely accepted thesis, but I'm not going to comment on that. We have an issue right before us right now, and I'm going to try to get to the bottom of it.
Do you think more of this kind of video?
Toronto's Deputy Mayor Norm Kelly speaking to reporters. What a week it's been. And it's not often that municipal politics eclipses the federal scene, particularly because of all the dramatic developments in Ottawa these days. But it's been that kind of week. Another video, this one made public, causing new problems for Toronto Mayor Rob Ford. Our Sunday Scrum ready to go. In Ottawa, the CBC's Rosemary Barton, freelance columnist Susan Riley, and in Toronto, Jamie Watt, Executive Chair of Navigator Limited and part of the Nationals Insiders panel on CBC. So, Rosie, this has been such a busy week. In some ways, the Senate stories seem to be coming to a head this week, and yet, I have to assume even on Parliament Hill, everyone was riveted with what was going on in Toronto.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was incredible. In our newsroom alone, people were running to their TV sets on a regular basis every time we thought Rob Ford was going to open his mouth. And all the politicians watching very, very closely here as well. In part because, they know him and they've, especially the Conservatives have done events with him, in part just because they're in government, in parts because there are some alliances there. And there are a lot of people, let's be honest, quite distraught at what they're seeing, not only at sort of the human part of the tragedy that is unfolding in front of people, but also that he doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And for people in Ottawa, that's pretty stunning because, you've had people leave over a $16 glass of orange juice. So to not leave after you've admitted to doing crack cocaine is a little strange to people here in Ottawa.
And Susan, from your vantage point, how isolated do you think Rob Ford is right now?
Well, he's increasingly isolated, but he's also untouchable. The Toronto City Council can't get rid of him. Premier Wynne doesn't want to. She doesn't want to set a precedent. He's even beyond the reach of Stephen Harper, who controls everything in the whole country. I mean, I guess the only people that have any influence with the mayor are his family, and they're sort of downplaying the whole situation. His brother suggested, take a couple of weeks and go to Florida. The mayor's even resisting that. He's saying, well, I'm going to stay on the job. I'm going to get some counseling, sort of like studying French at lunchtime.
Right.
I just don't think it's going to change.
Just on that, Jamie, who might have Rob Ford's ear right now?
Well, I don't think too many have his ear right now, Nancy, and I think that's part of the problem. I think that loneliness and isolation is increasing. What we saw last week was it wasn't just the predictable people who are always after Rob Ford, the left of council who've been screaming at him to resign since the moment he was elected. Last week we saw his allies, members of his executive committee, those people closest to him politically, saying it was time to go. And I disagree a little bit with Susan that he's untouchable. She may be right that he's technically untouchable, but I think at some point this thing is going to have to resolve itself. And where I think it's going is people are increasingly concerned about him and about his health, but at the same time they think he's got to recuse himself. And I think Torontonians can hold both of those views at the same time.
Okay, it's been interesting to watch the drama play out because initially when the confession came out on Tuesday, there was absolute shock. But then that started to turn to, as you say, concern. It took on a kind of personal, intimate spectacle. So that has certainly shaped some of the reaction we're hearing. We want to talk about one reaction. This is Finance Minister Jim Flaherty, a longtime family friend. This is what he said when asked about Rob Ford this week.
Yeah, I am close with the family. I am. At the end of the day, he has to make his own decision about what he ought to do.
Even so, Jamie, it sounds like Flaherty was really struggling with this. I suppose, like so many people, just trying to figure out what is the message to Rob Ford or what is the message about Rob Ford?
Well, two things. First, let's start with Jim himself. Everyone sees him as this big, tough finance minister, but he actually is a big, squishy teddy bear with an awfully big heart who stands by his friends. And so I wasn't surprised to see him moved by a tragedy that's happening to one of his friends, and a tragedy that's not only happening to the mayor, but happening on the front page of the paper and on newscasts right around the whole world.
Now, Susan, you mentioned you think that technically speaking, he's untouchable, and the interesting thing is the grimmer the situation and the growing concern doesn't seem to have stunted that core support for Ford. So, is there actually a strategy here? Is it possible that he's thinking, I can tough this out, and so far, nobody's saying that I can be proven wrong?
I don't know how much it's a strategy and how much it's an addiction. I think Rob Ford is addicted to his job. I mean, he has said that he loves his job. I think he needs his job. He needs his job for validation. Why else would he be hanging on so grimly? Because had he taken the original, invitation to leave, he might have been able to go away till after Christmas Day and then return kind of stronger. But he just seems to be terrified to leave his office.
So, Rosie, I know I keep asking this question each week we talk about Rob Ford, and so far the answer to are Conservatives generally increasingly uncomfortable by what they're seeing. But the longer this goes on, are you sensing any discomfort among federal Conservatives?
Publicly, they don't want to talk about it. A couple of them will stop, and I think Tony Clement said that he was going to pray for him this week. It'll be that sort of comment. Privately, they realize that they cannot be showing up at events with him. They can't be making funding announcements with the City of Toronto. They can't do those kinds of things. And at some point, that is going to become limiting for them, for the mayor, and for the City of Toronto. I know everyone keeps saying, the city's functioning, you don't really need the mayor, it's the executive that's doing the work, things are rolling along. But there are things that will be affected by this, and that people have to start thinking about that. And I don't know if Mayor Ford is aware of that or is able enough to be aware of that at this stage.
So, Jamie, I know you're not advising Rob Ford, but under the circumstances as you watch this play out, if you had an opportunity to have his ear, what would you suggest right now?
I would suggest that he recuse himself. I think all right-minded Torontonians are now at that point of view. Whether he resigns or not, that would be up to him. I would certainly suggest that he recuse himself and he look after whatever medical problems that he's got. I think if he does that, Jim Crowell's got a terrific piece in the Star today about the human nature of addiction and the possibility for recovery. And I would suggest the mayor read that, read Jim and read his column and follow his advice.
Okay.
And, I think the nature of his support is so unique. I think he's got a great opportunity to come back. Well, I had thought that.
Right.
After last week, it's become increasingly difficult, mostly because of the chaos that surrounded last week. It wasn't just the revelations made worse by Friday night's Fifth Estate, but it was the chaos of it that really, I think, has shaken people's confidence.
Okay. And can I just say very quickly that I totally take Jamie's point about Mr. Flaherty. I think his concern is very sincere. It's very touching. And I think a human response is, it looks good on everyone. However, there's a double standard here, I think, at play. This is a government that's been so hard on drugs, gangs, and guns that is basically calling Justin Trudeau, is accusing him of supporting the drug trade because he supports decriminalization of marijuana. There's an incredibly glaring double standard here.
Okay. Well, speaking of Justin Trudeau, that's somebody that we'll be talking about in just a moment. We are going to take a pause, but do stay with us because coming up, Conservatives trying to change the channel, of course, on the Senate expense scandal, but the opposition apparently wants to hold on to that remote. You hold on to that remote. You don't want to go anywhere. We're back in a bit. Stick around.
If we can't expect the rule of law in Canada, then where on earth can we expect it?
The misconduct of these three senators called for firm action and that it's what we have taken.
Swift justice or political expediency? 3 high-profile senators dispatched from the upper chamber. The government says it's over. The opposition says not so fast. We're back with round 2 of Sunday Scrum. Susan Riley, Rosemary Barton in Ottawa, Jamie Watt in Toronto. So, Susan, now that the Senate has voted on these suspension motions, what gives this story oxygen?
Well, I just wonder. I think, first of all, there's a bit of scandal fatigue abroad in the land. This is a chronic infection. It's going to flare up now and again. But I think a lot of the fizzle might have gone out, sizzle, I should say, might have gone out of this Senate scandal. And now that the senators are gone, I'll tell you why. I'm not that confident in the RCMP investigation. It's taking a heck of a long time. As of last week, they still hadn't interviewed Senator Patrick Brazeau. They only asked for the email trail from Mike Duffy after he talked about it in the Senate chamber.
Right.
I mean, are they getting their clues on television? And finally, I don't think it's a sure thing that Nigel Wright is going to be found guilty of anything. He may, certainly not bribery. He may be found, he may be totally exonerated.
Rosie, you jump in here.
Yeah, I disagree, actually. I think the RCMP are being quite efficient and quite aggressive, and that they're doing a pretty darn good job. I've read all the affidavits, and they are progressing quickly, I think, in terms of this kind of thing. I think, yes, they are taking some of their cues from what people are saying on TV, because that's where a lot of it is being said, right? Duffy goes into the Senate to say things because he has privilege and is protected, so he can say stuff there. But I think that they're moving pretty quickly, and I think we are coming to a head. That's what we are sort of hearing in the background, that something is coming to a head on one of these files. And I think Nigel Wright is cooperating with the RCMP, and that we will very soon get his side of the story, at least through the RCMP, if not through an interview that he, maybe one day grants to someone.
Okay, I need to bring you in on this, Jamie. So are we talking sizzle or fizzle?
I'm not sure yet, and the reason I'm not sure yet is because there's so much that we don't know, and I think Susan has the right analogy. It's a chronic disease this government is going to be living with for a long time, which will have flare-ups that are unpredictable. Right. Some of the flare-ups will be predictable, and some won't be predictable. But, the whole expelling of these senators from the Senate, they made a corned beef hash out of the whole thing. Now there's stories about perhaps they're going to qualify for their pensions, and Tony Clemency is going to bring in legislation to stop that. Well, that's one of the things that will flare up and bring it right back to public consciousness.
That's
again.
oxygen,
Exactly.
Well, interesting that even though the vote has come and gone in the Senate, of course, the interest moved back to the House of Commons. Just want to give you a sample of one exchange, because it still dominated the Commons this past week. This is, of course, between opposition leader and the Prime Minister.
Can the Prime Minister be crystal clear? Will he table all of those documents in the House of Commons so that all Canadians can see them? Yes or no?
The responsibility of this government, of course, is to make sure all accountability is followed. We're obviously making sure authorities are assisted with their look into the various individuals, as is their responsibility.
So that is just a sample of some of the Q&A this week. So, Rosie, in the quest for crystal clarity here, what do you think about Mike Duffy's emails, the fact that they have now been handed over to the RCMP? Does that give the opposition fodder to keep peppering away with the questions, or actually does it give the Prime Minister some cover and say, we defer to the investigation?
Yeah, I think it does a little bit of both. The thing I think that hurts the NDP the most, and let's be honest, they were on a bit of a kick there. I think they were doing a pretty good job, particularly Tom Mulcair, with that this is a break week coming up, and so we have a stop in the game, if you will, and that will make things difficult to get back on that horse next Monday or next Tuesday when the PM's in the House and try and get back to this stuff, especially given we haven't seen the Mike Duffy emails, right? The lawyer keeps saying, oh, it's way more explicit, the stuff that we gave, that you're going to really see what we meant, but we don't have them, and neither does the NDP. So either they go on a fishing expedition in question period, or they just keep up this whole strategy of trying to make it look like the Prime Minister is evading questions. And I don't know how sustainable that is, to be honest.
Just on another front, though, Susan, we know that the Auditor General is looking into Senate expenses for all senators. So how anxious are senators about this? And again, talk about a huge aqualung of oxygen there.
I agree. However, it could also be very good news for Mr. Harper, strangely enough, because if the Auditor General discovers that there are Liberal senators who've been abusing their expenses, and that's entirely possible, it broadens the whole sort of scope of disgust. It takes some of the focus off the Conservatives. You know, if it becomes a story about Senate reform, about either changing it or getting rid of it, then I think the Prime Minister is out of danger. I think he's got a good case to put forward. I tried to make these modest improvements, and I was, you know, blocked and thwarted and so on and so forth. I think he's off the hook. That one seems far less dangerous to me.
I want to talk about Nigel Wright with you, Jamie. You know, so many people are interested in what he has to say. He's definitely been very much under the radar, but he seems key. Should he emerge? Should he go public? What's your expectation? What's the likelihood that Nigel Wright might emerge and haunt the Harper government on this?
Well, there are very few people more loyal than Nigel Wright, so I don't think you're going to see him and more disciplined and more thoughtful. So I don't think you're ever going to see Nigel Wright lose his temper and fly off the handle and start saying whatever. I do also know Nigel to be a very honest person, and if there are any kind of legal proceedings, whatever, where he has to give sworn testimony, you can be sure he will tell the truth and the whole truth as he knows it. So I think there's risk there, but I think the Prime Minister is also lucky that he has Nigel Wright in that position as opposed to other people.
Okay, I want to talk about another name in the news this week. Susan, you flagged it. Justin Trudeau, of course, certainly in the news because of a Toronto soiree that had people actually seething. So-called ladies' night, time with the Liberal leader was deemed sexist by some. And then there was a debate that whirled over Trudeau's comments at the event on China and dictatorship. So we're asking, was this event a hit or a miss for Justin Trudeau?
I cannot even believe that we're discussing this. It's not right. Women should be given an equal voice, and they should be talked to in the same way that men are.
What is patronizing about hosting a women's fundraiser? I fail to see how that is at all patronizing or at all sexist.
So you heard first from Conservative MP Michelle Rempel and Liberal event organizer Amanda Alvaro, both reacting to this week's fundraiser. So we want to ask our panelists, hit or a miss for Justin Trudeau. So, Jamie, I know earlier this fall we talked about that dinner party with Trudeau, and I think everyone agreed that that was essentially a hit. This time, a little bit more complicated. Is this something that could backfire for
It's
Trudeau?
not complicated at all. It's a massive miss.
Okay.
And it's a massive miss for two reasons. Can you imagine if the Conservatives had ever had something called Ladies' Night? There would be hell to pay. It's ridiculous, and they should apologize for it, you know, immediately. It was just a mistake. But the bigger mistake was saying that he admired the basic dictatorship of China. Yeah. Never mind the Ladies' Night. That's going to go by the wayside. But because that tape of him saying that will for sure become an advertisement for the Conservative Party. I'm surprised it's not on the air already.
So, Susan, what do you think?
I think the Evite was kind of playful and innocuous. I didn't really take it that seriously. I didn't see it as insulting. I totally agree with Jamie about the China remarks. They're inscrutable. You know, some people say, oh, he was just joking. Right. Yeah. He seemed to be praising the fact that because China's a dictatorship, they can get solar power in just like that. It was nuts, and it points to a much deeper problem with Justin Trudeau, which is that you don't know what the heck he thinks about anything, really.
So what do you think, Rosie? Hit or miss?
Yeah, I mean, the ladies' night thing, listen, it was a hit for fundraising. That is not the kind of thing that hurts Justin Trudeau or the Liberal Party. I don't think they were too worried about it. The China stuff is a big problem. It's a big problem because I don't know what he was talking about. And second of all, he seems to not be aware of the level of scrutiny on him and the way these things are going to turn into, as Jamie said, attack ads and fodder for his opponents. So he has to be a lot more careful of what's coming out of his mouth, and he clearly isn't.
You know, we could have nicknamed this Has Legs, because it sounds like this has more legs than a furniture store. Anyway, lots to watch for. I know it's pretty quiet next week. House is not sitting, but we've got the economic update, so we'll be talking more about that. Thanks, guys. Same time next week.
Okay, thanks, Nancy.
Bye, Nancy.